encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. Welcome to the podcast where every day is a great day with Jesus. I'm Robert Hatfield.
I'm Dan Winkler, and we are grateful again to welcome you to our podcast, A Day with Jesus. We love talking about our Lord, and this is the 9th season that we've been blessed to do it. Thank you for inviting us into your world on a weekly basis. This podcast drops every Tuesday, and we're thankful that you make it a part of your life. You bless us by allowing us to talk about our Lord. How you doing today, Robert?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well, I think. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It was great to be with you last week.
Yes.
Tell people where we were and what went on.
Well, we were at the Freed Hardeman annual Bible lectureship, and we were able to sit down. A lot of people, I don't think, realize that we're not really often in the same space together. But here we be. We were last time. And so anyway, now we're back to our old separate ways.
We're actually 100 miles apart, basically. And but we, through the process of technology, are blessed to do this. And it's always a joy to me to be able to do this together. I like doing it live. And in fact, that was the second of 5 different live broadcasts that we've been asked to do this year. It amazes me that folks are saying, could y'all come here and do one of those live broadcasts of Today with Jesus? And of course, if we're going to be in the area together, that's something we love to do. And so that was the second of 5. I believe we're going to do this in Branson, Missouri in July, in Sevierville, Tennessee in August, and in Nashville, Tennessee sometime in the spring, in March. Good.
Yeah, last weekend in March. Yeah.
That's good. You know what I like about doing it live?
What?
I get to look into a microphone, and I don't have to look at my computer screen and see you staring back at me.
I know. I relate to that. That's good.
I think you do.
I don't have to stare at me either when we're live.
I know that's what you meant.
Yeah, that's what I meant by that.
Oh, mercy.
Sure it is.
I apologize to you for my voice. I came back from Freed Hardeman with the gunk and have been fighting that thing, for about 5 or 6 days. My voice is a little weak and here and there, but we're going to get through this and do it with joy because we get to talk about Jesus. This particular season are looking, in fact, this one and next season, we're thinking about the descriptors of Jesus in the book of Hebrews. Some of them, they're just outright there. Just easy to see. Captain of our faith, and such like. Some of them are more behind the scenes or implied. And as we began the book, we find ourselves confronting a variety of them. And so we've laughed at the idea. We started this season and we're not even through the first 3 verses of the entire book. And that's because the book begins by reminding us of how absolutely special and marvelous Jesus is by giving us all of these inspired, implicit descriptors of Jesus. So we come to another one today. And last week, I think it was the shock and awe of God's shock and awe. That is, how about that?
That was good. That was good.
The shock and awe being a term relative to God's glory. And of course, right here in Hebrews 1 verse 3, Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his God's nature. Oh, who Jesus really is. The prophet of God, the heir of all things, the Shekinah of God's Shekinah. And here's one that has the very character, the imprint of God's nature. He's divine. Here's where we are today. Verse 3 goes on to say, and he upholds the universe. I think some translations may say all things. He upholds the universe by the word of his power. So, what is the implied descriptor we're giving to Jesus today, Robert?
All right, this one is a little different. We're talking about Jesus as a, well, our episode title says climate controller.
The climate controller. I hear a whole lot today about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
I hear a whole lot today about global warming. And I hear a whole lot today about the Green New Deal. And we're not going there because we stay away from politics. But climate change, global warming, I would have to say there is something to that. Experience teaches us. I remember years ago, we moved to Tennessee almost 50 years ago. And when we did, man alive, every winter we had huge snows and ice storms, and it would get down to sub-zero weather all of the time. And nowadays, you don't have as much of that. If you have one really good snow, you feel blessed. Two, wow, what a great winter we're having. So there has been some change. We have to admit to that. If you want to get into a real fervent discussion, sit down with a millennial or a Gen Z and talk about climate change and just kind of test the waters and say, I'm not sure I believe in that, and then see where the conversation goes. That happened to me recently with some of my grandchildren. And, I appreciate the fact that they have such concern about the future of our planet and want to talk about this and make proper adjustments to help things get better. And I'm right there with them in that. Politics set aside. But when it comes to climate change, global warming, we need to think about something else. Maybe I should put it this way. We need to reason within our discussion about someone else. And that someone else is Jesus. Our passage says Jesus is the one who upholds the universe by the word of his power. Now, Robert, when I look at Hebrews 1, verses 1 through 3, when it comes to the universe, Jesus is presented to me as the one responsible for two things. What would those two things be if we can look at our descriptor of today and then reflect back on where we've been in times past? What are the two things that we have come to mind when it comes to Jesus' relationship with the universe?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first one is at the end of verse 2, because it says that it is through whom, referring back to Jesus,
Right.
that God created the world.
Okay.
And so there's a creation there.
All right.
He's the
Right.
creator. And then in verse 3, per our focus today, he upholds the universe by the word of his power. So he's a sustainer in verse 3, even as he's creator up there in verse 2.
Okay. So he made it
Mm-hmm.
and he takes care of it. That's the essence of it. He created the world. He made it. And then he upholds. The word translated there literally means to hold, to bear, to bear up, to bear. He upholds the universe. Now that's the word translated literally means everything. He upholds everything.
Mm.
So that's a decision that was made by the translators of the English Standard Version when they put the word universe in there for the word everything. So Jesus created the world, and in reference to that contextually, he's the one that bears up, that holds everything. He holds and takes care of everything relative to the world. So Jesus is the climate controller.
Mm.
There's another verse I would like for us to turn to, if we could, that sets both of these relationships before us as well. Let's go back to Colossians chapter 1. In Colossians chapter 1, excuse me, I'm again reading about Jesus. In fact, I read this passage, Robert, and it takes me back several seasons when we actually spent an entire season
Mhm.
going verse by verse through the book of Colossians. And what a wonderful study that was.
Yeah.
A book that teaches us that Jesus is to have the preeminence of everything, and that in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and that he is our life, the main flow of thought, giving us the magnificence of Jesus through the book of Colossians. Well, in Colossians chapter 1, I read in verse 16, relative to Jesus, it says, by him all things were created. There it is. He's the creator in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through or by him and for him. Jesus created everything. That's what the passage says. It reminds me of John 1, verses 1 to 3. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Without him, the Word, was not anything made that has been made. And verse 14 identifies the Word as the only begotten of the Father, Jesus. Without Jesus, nothing was made. Jesus made everything. He's the creator. That's an incredible observation. I go back to Genesis chapter 1, and there I read the words created, made, formed, made again. The word translated created is a Hebrew term that means to fashion by cutting. The word translated made in Genesis 1 and 2 is a Hebrew word that means to press and to squeeze, like a potter squeezing clay. The word translated formed in Genesis 1 and 2 is a Hebrew word that means to craft like a potter. And so I put those three words together, and it's like um, Jesus is the one who just reached up from nothing and cut away from nothing the raw material that he squeezed together and crafted like a potter a universe into existence. And then in Genesis 2:22, there's the word made again, translating another Hebrew word in reference to Eve being made from the rib of Adam. And the word that is made there means to literally build or to craft something special. So Jesus is the one that is doing that. Accordingly, when we turn to Psalm 33 and we read verses, um, let's see, verse 8 and following, let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke and it came to be. He commanded and it stood firm. I'm reading about Jesus there. He's the one that spoke and it came to be. He's the one that commanded and it stood firm. And according to Hebrews chapter 1, as the one who upholds all things, he's still the one who speaks and things remain firm.
Mm.
Not only do we read of Jesus creating everything in Colossians 1:16, the very next verse, Colossians 1:17 says, he is before all things, and in him or by him, Jesus, all things hold together. Literally stand together. Everything remains glued together because of Jesus. Hold together in Colossians 1:17 translates a verb that is in a tense that means it something that happened in the past, and the consequences of that remain to this very day. Jesus brought everything into existence by speaking it into existence, and it is his word of power, according to Hebrews 1 verse 3, that keeps things standing together, keeps things firm. Jesus is in control of our world, our universe, and all the goings on therein. So when it comes to global warming, climate change, I think we need to be very gracious with one another. And we need to say, there's probably something to that. And there might be some things that we can do um, to help that. But we don't need to get on the bandwagon of the sky is falling and think that everything is coming to an end in so many years. There's only one individual that knows that, or that is going to make that call,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the one that's in control of everything, Jesus. Robert, before I throw things to you, I went and did a little digging,
Mm.
and here are some things that might be contributing to climate change, global warming, or the results of it, I should say. Um, if we don't make changes, if things continue the way they are, the concern is we're going to have more droughts. We're going to have more heat waves. There might be a rising of the sea levels, melting of glaciers, the warming of the oceans, and all the climate catastrophes that can come with those. And so I kept reading, and I came across an article that made some suggestions of things that we might be able to do to help with climate change and global warming. And I'm willing to do my part. I know I'm a baby boomer, or as we are now spoken of in jest, the boomers. I'm an older individual, and that's okay. That is okay. I want to do what I need to do. And here's some things that's suggested. Number one, we can recycle. Well, I can do better there. I don't do much of that. Number two, we can drive less. Well, I am driving less. Number two, we can plant gardens. Okay, I've done that. Number four, we can plant trees. I'm all for that. Number five, we can eat less meat. I'm going to take issue with that one. I mean, I got to have my meat. But anyway, there's one thing that we can do that's not on this list. And in my research, I never came to this one. Here are things that we can do that can help with climate change, or with climate change, with global warming. Here's something that we can do when it comes to the future of the world. Recycle, drive less, plant gardens, plant trees, eat less meat. This one's not mentioned. How about this one? Trust more. Put our trust in Jesus. Where this climate goes, what happens to this world is in his hands. He is the one that upholds all things by the word of his power.
Mm.
And so I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm not going to get crazy about it, but I'm not going to be overly concerned either, because I'm going to place the care of this universe into the hands of my Lord and know he can do much better with its future than anyone else making any recommendation relative to climate change and global warming. Now that we have lost half of our audience.
No, but I'm just thinking here. I appreciate the humility and the study that you're given to this, because unfortunately we get polarized behind the red and blue, behind the elephant and the donkey,
There you
and
go.
because of that, we're not really willing to entertain that there could be some validity to some of these things. Isn't it interesting? I
Absolutely.
mean, God made the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was a perfect environment until Adam and Eve came in and messed it up. But, and that was the introduction of sin. But even in that environment, God tasked them to tend the garden and to keep it, Genesis chapter 2. So there's a stewardship idea that I think still remains even for us. I mean, we still have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. As human beings, we're, so to speak, at the top of the food chain. So there's some stewardship implications to all of this.
Absolutely.
Managing that over against, or maybe balancing it with what we're talking about today from Hebrews chapter 1 can be somewhat of the challenge. But we find this tension a lot, man's part and God's part. It's not man's part versus God's part. It's just, okay, I trust God to do what he does, and God has tasked me to do what I'm going to do, knowing that I'm going to do it imperfectly. I mean, that's where we are. But what I get to do then is to, like you said, trust in him. That doesn't alleviate everything that I need to do or should do, but it does help me be at peace with it.
Yes.
He's going to work it out.
Do what we can do and trust in the Lord.
Yeah.
And then if I could just place this thought in adjunct, do what we need to do. Oh, yes. And accept the concept of there are some things going on.
Yeah.
And then just trust in the Lord. And then in adjunct as well, be gracious with one another in this matter. Let's be gracious with each other and know that some of this might not be as alarming to some as it is to others. We need to be gracious with one another in these matters.
Good point.
And both viewpoints need to funnel their thoughts into the care of Jesus, who is the one who upholds all things by the word of his power. I would like for you, if you would, to take this passage and these thoughts that we've been discussing and make some very practical applications to our lives relative to Jesus as the climate controller, or Jesus in control of the world.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the peace that really this ought to give us. I mean, okay, here we read a verse like Hebrews 1 verse 3. He does uphold all things by the word of his power. Well, what am I supposed to glean from this? Remember, this was a letter, maybe even a transcribed sermon of sorts that was written to real Christians, and the points are all really made as a word of encouragement to build these people up. What encouragement am I supposed to take from this? Well, all right, Jesus is the agent of creation, and he's the sustainer of everything that is. Therefore, I don't have to worry. And I see this in three ways. Number one, I don't have to worry about the activity of God in the universe. Deists state, okay, God made it, and then he backed off and said, okay, this is just going to spin, and I'm not involved with this anymore. God's not the watchmaker who made a watch and then stepped back and let the mechanisms do the things that they do. Hebrews 1 verse 3 actively involves Jesus in present tense, upholding the universe, keeping everything, holding it all together. And you've also brought in Colossians chapter 1, 16 and 17. And even then, everything finds its place ultimately in him. And so the New Testament view is that, Jesus is dynamically active, involved in the created order. And that helps me to feel good, because when I pray to God and I'm approaching God's throne through Jesus, and Jesus is there by God's side, pleading for me and interceding for me, I can expect that in the unseen realm of providence, operating through the laws of nature that Jesus himself was a part of creating, that he is able to answer those prayers in a way that's in accordance with his will. Those things help me a lot. And,
Absolutely.
if we're concerned about the change of climate and things like that, well, I would assume so is Jesus. I mean, he made all of this. He's active in these things. And so he will come to our aid and help us in those ways too.
Maybe we need to be talking to him about it rather than talking about each other.
Hey, that's a good point. And
Hmm.
then, secondly, and now perhaps a little more to this point that we've been making is, I don't have to worry about the activity of God in the universe, but number two, I don't really need to worry about the durability of the universe. Sometimes in the climate change, global warming type discussions, you'll hear concerns about, if we continue on these trends, then we're going to either use up resources or the climate is going to be so changed such that, you know, the extreme cases are human life will no longer be sustainable, or maybe in certain parts of the world, uh, you know people won't be able to inhabit those areas anymore. When what I see from Hebrews 1 verse 3 is that, well, ultimately, Jesus is in control of all of that. He is upholding everything
Right.
by his words. The words that resulted in the creation of all that is are the very words that sustain all that is, even in this moment. And so Jesus isn't going to let the world fall into utter chaos. God is not the author of confusion. And he ensures at the same time that the world will not end before it's time for this life as we know it so to do. Jesus made it plain, at least when he was here on earth, Matthew 24:36, that day and hour knows no man, only the Father. Not even the angels in heaven are aware of it. But Acts 17 tells me this: God has appointed a time on which he will judge all things. And he will do that through the agency of the one whom he raised from the dead, which is a clear reference to Jesus.
Right.
So there is a day, at least in the heart and the mind of God, and God knows when that day is going to be, whether we do or not. And could it have something to do with climate and I don't know. I guess God providentially could be working some of those things, but the point is, we can't really predict that. It's just up to us to trust he's going to take care of us. And guess what? Whatever happens after that, he's going to take care of us then too. That's why
Absolutely. That's a
that's
great
why
point.
that's why it's so important for us to align ourselves with him today. And why would we not want to?
Hmm.
Third and finally for me is that, I don't have to worry about the authority of the universe. In other words, who's in control. Um, in Greek mythology, you had Atlas, who was, underneath and holding up the world. That's not what Jesus is described as. That's not the picture that's painted of him here in Hebrews 1 verse 3. He carries out government not by shouldering the load from underneath, but by, having the authority to govern it from, shall we say, above, from the one who actually made it, and is able to do that not by muscles, and strength in that way, but just because his very words are so powerful. Just like the world was created by the word of God through his son, chapter 1 verse 2, chapter 11 verse 3 of Hebrews, it is sustained by the son's powerful word. And so I don't have to worry about who's in control of this. So authority, durability, activity. He is active in this world. Now, what that makes me do then is step back a moment. The writer of Hebrews says he upholds the universe by the word of his power. I may want to know something. What does that mean, upholds the universe? How exactly did that happen? Well, God the Father was a part of creation and Jesus was the agent. I may have some questions about that. Maybe I wish I could call up YouTube and watch a video of it happening, in action. But the reality is, the force of the writer of Hebrews is upon this one, Jesus, who is so powerful, so glorious, so exalted, and upon the very words that he speaks. If his word created us and sustains us and the universe that we inhabit, then what should be our response to his word, which is able to save our souls?
Mm.
James 1:21, receive with meekness the written, the engrafted, the implanted, depending on your translation, word, which is able to save. And Jesus says, by my words you shall be justified. By my words you shall be condemned. John 12:48. With that in mind, all right, we know how powerful his words are because we live in a universe sustained by them. So now what should I do when his words are directed specifically at me through his word, the Bible? Wow. Now there's a
Yeah.
thought.
Oh boy. When you were talking about his word being a word of salvation, my mind
Mhm.
immediately went to the next chapter,
Oh, yeah.
which talks about the great salvation. And it says it was declared at first by the Lord. So
Mm.
here's Jesus himself while he is on earth. He's talking to people about salvation. And of course, he shed his blood so that that salvation could be a reality. Went
Mm.
back to heaven, is at the right hand of God, and now that salvation is possible through his shed blood. And it's that message of salvation that is powerful. It's great. And it came first of all by the proclamation of his spoken word. In Hebrews 1 verse 3, it is his spoken word that brought everything into existence as the creator, and his spoken word that upholds everything that has been created. It is just phenomenal to think once again, this is how the book of Hebrews is launched. Let's keep in mind the entire book of Hebrews is self described as a word of exhortation. Or if we could put it in a different way, translate it differently, a word of encouragement. Hebrews 12, verse, what is it, 23? A word of
Mhm.
encouragement. So this entire book was written to encourage. To encourage whom? We've seen this in the introduction of our book at the first episode of this season. Jews had become Christians, but were struggling to maintain their Christianity, their allegiance to Jesus, because of the pressures that came to them via their past, Judaism. And so they were wondering whether or not to hold on to Jesus or revert back to their previous religion of Judaism. And the entire book of Hebrews was written by an unknown author in which the Holy Spirit is encouraging these brethren to hold on to Jesus, to remain true to Jesus, and not revert back to a former way of life. And as a word of encouragement, exhorting these Christians to hold on to Jesus, the book begins in so many different ways describing the glory of Jesus. You hold on to Jesus. He's the spokesman through whom God speaks a word of salvation today. You hold on to Jesus. He's the one that God has made heir of everything, and you can be an heir with him, Romans 8 says. Hold on to Jesus. He's the creator of everything. He made you. Hold on to him. Hold on to Jesus. He's the very radiance of God's very glory. You hold on to him. And then today, hold on to Jesus. He's the one that's keeping everything going. The sun rose in the morning because of Jesus. It will set tonight, and the moon will be in the sky. A sky bedecked with all those beautiful stars. And all of that is still there as it was last night because of Jesus. I'm breathing air right now because of Jesus. So it's all upheld by this one that is so magnanimous, Jesus Christ. So that's how the book begins. The one that God uses to tell us how to go to heaven. The one who is heir of everything, who created everything, who maintains everything. Hey, he's the very one that's sitting right next to God as your high priest.
Mm.
He's at God's side, but he's on your side. Hold on to him. That's how the book begins and continues to unfold. And it is one that, if taken to heart, can make you fall deeper and deeper in love with Jesus, if anything can.
Love it.
Yeah, I know. I do too.
Hey, so we had a YouTuber comment just today, actually, and said they
Okay.
commented on season 9, episode 1. And she said, I'm just now starting this series and I am so excited to dig in. So let us say to you, welcome when you finally made it over here to episode number
Amen.
5. But that's great too. And it just reminds me of the fact all these episodes are archived. You can go check them out. You start this at your own pace. But when you catch up, new episodes will be released every
There you go.
Tuesday from thelightnetwork.tv and our podcast partners. And on YouTube, hit follow or subscribe. That way you'll never miss an episode.
That's it.
Wow.
And we
It's
might
going to be a good
say
one.
that she's not any more excited about this study and this season than we are.
And we are. That's right.
Man, I can't wait for the next episode when we get to dive even deeper into how wonderful Jesus is.
I'm excited too. I want to thank you all for being a part of this week's episode. thelightnetwork.tv/TWJ for more information and to contact us. See you next time.
God bless everybody.